Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mike. I have Richard on the phone with me as well. We're both from DynamicPoint. Today, we are going to be going over using Office 365 for AP automation. So the presentation is going to be pretty quick. We only have a half an hour. So we're going to get started and get right to it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Go over a couple slides. And then we are going to get right to a demonstration of what it is that we're talking about. All right, let's go ahead and pause my camera, go ahead and swap them up for my screen. So you guys should all see a slide presentation. Again, today's topic is using Office 365 for AP automation. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. If you guys have any questions, you could go ahead and put those in the chat or the question section. Richard is going to help monitor that for me as we're going through this. So I'll go ahead and pause, or he'll go ahead and pause me if anything comes up that we could address during the presentation. And then otherwise, like I said, if there's any other further questions, we're going to have our contact information at the end, and we'll go ahead and share that as well. So no further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Quick introduction to who DynamicPoint is and what it is that we do. So DynamicPoint, we create applications on top of the Office 365 framework. So we have a little bit of a history here before us, and I'll go ahead and grab my pen right here. So we started off back in 2009, back down here, creating .NET applications on a custom basis. Since then, we moved to SharePoint on-premise solutions. As we've probably already figured out, SharePoint on-premise is being rapidly replaced with Office 365, and that's where we are today. So we have followed this evolution of technology, and our products have gone through various iterations and refreshes and rebuilds just to support the new technology. So now we are entirely an Office 365 based software company, and all of our products do reside on that platform. So that's just a little bit about us. As far as our product portfolio, we have several products. We have a customer, vendor, and employee portal product. This uses the concept of an Office 365 SharePoint extranet to share data with either customers or vendors, so including things from my ERP, such things as orders, sales orders, purchase orders, invoices, things like that I want to collaborate with my various external parties, whether they be customers or vendors. We have an expense management product, which basically manages the reimbursement of employees, again, using an Office 365 app. But today's focus is going to be on AP automation. And our whole focus is not on our product today. We will be showing how it used in conjunction with these Office 365 technologies. But in general, today's presentation is just more of looking how I could use Office 365 to automate a business process. And today we're going to focus on applying that to AP invoices. So like I said, our product will sort of pop its head in there and we could show you what it does, but there's no necessity to buy our product for this to hopefully be a valuable session to you, because I'm going to show other features that just come with the out-of-the-box Office 365 tools. So that is an intro of us and our portfolio. Talking about Office 365, right? So obviously that term encompasses a lot of products, and we pull in different applications where it makes sense. So Microsoft gives us this whole ecosystem to sort of build products, right? And it's very similar to like an app store for your phone. Anytime you add an app to your phone, of course, it asks you these questions. Can I use your camera? Can I use, send you notifications, use your location, things like that. And that is, of course, the app using the platform provided by the iPhone or the Android device. And we do that same thing, but Microsoft provides a whole framework for companies like us to build these solutions that leverage their Office 365 tools. So basically, we're over here on this leftmost side, and you can sort of think of us as a piece of this overall pie. But the framework for our products, as well as these business processes that we're going to discuss today, namely invoice automation, is SharePoint. SharePoint is going to provide the framework from a security perspective, from the branding, from a document management. It is really the glue, if you will, or the foundation of what we're going to be discussing today. And if you're familiar at all with Office 365 tools, SharePoint is the anchor for a lot of things, right? Teams, OneDrive, building Power Automate workflows, all of those often come back to SharePoint as sort of being the home or the foundation for that. And we're no different, right? Our product will be added to SharePoint for document storage. For workflow, Microsoft gives us this other tool by the name of Power Automate. Power Automate is their workflow engine. It is extremely, flexible. You could create all kinds of triggers and actions and decision trees and things like that, where you're going to leverage that for routing invoices and pushing them for approval. When it comes to extending these features and by developing, custom apps or forms or things like that, we're going to pull together both Power Apps and Forms. Both of those gives us the ability to sort of extend the product. So we could, create custom methods for capturing invoices, mobile phone applications. You could do forms for doing check requests and things like that. So there's a lot of flexibility in using Power Apps and Forms to sort of extend the interface. And then last but not least is Power BI. So that's going to serve as the reporting tool of choice. Power BI has native integration to SharePoint, so I can bring all of that data directly into Power BI and begin building reports and analytics on all this information. All right, so enough of an intro. We're going to talk about the process of invoice automation, and then we're going to immediately jump in to start showing us how that works in Office 365. So the first step of AP automation is this first step here of getting the invoice, or what I'm going to call invoice receipt. So a vendor is going to give me an invoice, of course, and I need to get it, right? And ultimately what that means to us is it's going to come into this invoice library. This invoice library is going to capture all of the invoices that we need to process from a company perspective. Now, the first step is how do I want to get those in there, right? And that's where all of these options on the left-hand side come up. So I could email, right? I could use a monitored email inbox to receive that to an AP inbox and then go ahead and bring that right into the invoice library. I could give my employees a check request form, right? So they could go ahead and fill this out and submit this to AP, and that will go again end up in this library. I could do something like a mobile upload, right? So I could take a picture of this and upload it to the library if applicable. I could do a portal entry where I give my vendors a portal such that they could submit invoices into that portal. And again, it'll end up in that library. And this is the first step we're going to cover. The second step is going to take us to the processing of those invoices, which is basically using, our application and account assignment and vendor assignment and the other aspects of ERP financial data. Also, this is where we're going to use Power Automate to route this for review and approval. And then the third and final step is bringing that into an ERP system ready for payment. So let's go ahead and look at that first step, the invoice capture. All right, so here's my dashboard. For the sake of, transparency here, this is really just a SharePoint site. There's really nothing special about this site. I have added our app to it, but again, a lot of what I'm going to show you today is not really dependent upon our application. So I just have a SharePoint site that I've created. It is using Office 365. I've sort of laid it out based on those steps that I just discussed. So this is receiving invoices into a library. This is my processing queue of me processing these AP invoices after they've been received. And this is just a link to my ERP to show those that have already integrated. As well as I've included some sample reports here. So this is my aging by vendor total report, which is again using Power BI and unapproved invoice aging, showing how many days outstanding I have for the various invoices, again, using Power BI as a framework. So let's start off with step one, receiving invoices. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this up, and what you're gonna see is an empty library, right? So nothing too exciting here. But I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the ways that we could capture these invoices. And the important thing here is, invoices and routing from approval without automation are generally done on Outlook, right? That seems to be the go-to solution. People will forward these, send them to, managers for approval. Can you take a look at this or whatever else? What we're gonna show you is you don't have to quote unquote abandon those tools entirely, but you could use, the framework in SharePoint to add a layer of management and transparency to that to get you toward automation without changing, or buying really anything, because all of these, of course, are tools that you already own if you're an Office 365 subscriber. So let's go ahead and start off, and I'm going to pretend to be a vendor. And this first scenario I'm going to talk about is me submitting an invoice to a shared central library. Right, so here's my invoice coming from Acme Corporation. Again, I'm pretending to be a vendor, and this inbox is going to be my AP processing inbox. And I'm just going to say I'm going to submit a consulting invoice. And I'm going to send that. And this is going to be an AP inbox that happens to be an Office 365 inbox. And I happen to have a workflow associated to that that's going to take any invoices and add them to this library. And of course, I'll show you why in a second. But if I refresh here, sometimes it takes a second or two, and sometimes I look really good and it happens immediately. Okay, invoice comes in. Ta-da, all right, there's my invoice. And if I refresh really quick, bam, you're gonna see all of those columns populate with data, right? And what happened is I monitored that inbox using a Power Automate workflow, of which I could show you. And after it was received, we performed OCR on it. And we submitted it to an OCR engine, got all of the data out of it, and then after receiving that metadata, it's going into our product as an invoice that's ready to be processed. So that's why you saw it disappear. But even that first step, so let's talk about the value there. Basically, as opposed to that just going into an inbox and being routed, right, for review and approval, it has been captured, and I could use OCR to extrapolate some of that key data of that invoice that will later, of course, be used for integration, but could also be used for such things as workflow. How much is this invoice? Is there a dollar threshold associated to the approval, etc.? So let's talk about this from a technical perspective, right? This is, what I'm saying, tip number one is I could use Power Automate to monitor inboxes and bring those invoices directly into SharePoint, and then of course later perform OCR. So the first one I showed you was Outlook, right? And that coming into an inbox, Power Automate picked it up, and then it was stored in SharePoint. So let's go look at the form idea. The form idea is interesting because it basically can provide a check request form. So a check request form is interesting if I have invoices going to people, in my organization that ultimately are going to forward it to accounts payable. So these are managers who are maybe buying these services, they're getting the invoices, and then they're just handing them over to AP. But as opposed to them, just willy-nilly sending it to me in an email, I want to give them a more strict process or regimented process of being able to fill out a form. So this is just using a Microsoft form. Again, I'm capturing some data here, some things like the purchase order, or maybe a cost center associated to it, an invoice ID, an amount, and then they could upload the invoice. We'll go ahead and grab that one. Okay, so a few concepts before I submit this. One, again, powered by Microsoft Forms, you could add as many fields as you want. Why would I do this as opposed to email? The biggest thing is I can enforce data collection that I don't have to go back and forth and ask people for. So OCR could obviously do a lot of this, like the vendor name and the PO number OCR could pick up on, but maybe things like the requesting cost center, or an approving manager or something like that, I need someone to specify data that's not going to be recognized by OCR on the invoice. A form gives me the ability to do that, right? Because I could put fields in there and I could require them and give a more formal process to my company using a simple Microsoft form, as opposed to them just emailing it to me and saying, hey, can you pay this? So when I submit this form, what's going to occur is it's going to, again, be picked up by a workflow and added directly to that library for processing. So similar to the email example, if I refresh, you'll see that form, and if I refresh again, you should hopefully see the data on the form as well as any results from OCR that I picked up added as metadata to these columns. So let's look at how we did that, right? So we introduced that concept. Again, here was the slide where we introduced it. It's coming from forms, it's coming from Outlook. We're using Power Automate, and that data is being received into SharePoint. So I happen to have that workflow open just so we could go look at it. It's actually pretty doggone simple. So here on new email, so I'm using an AP automation inbox that I submitted it to. You can see here's my steps within Power Automate. I create a file and I pass the file that was included on the email. I get the properties of the file. And then this is actually where it's getting submitted to our OCR engine. So this is posting that to OCR and then getting the results of OCR and updating that in the SharePoint library. That is the email example. Same idea with the form, right? So here I'm using the form connector of Power Automate. Vendor invoice submission, as soon as that is submitted, get the data, create the file. So same idea for both. All right, so let's go back and talk about the next step. So the next step is, I mentioned, after it got uploaded to that library, we wanted to provide some automation in the form of OCR. So what I could do now that I have that data in this library, there's all kinds of tools that I could use for OCR. I could use third party, there's Microsoft AI Builder, there's the App Store, there's, just using that document library as a framework. There's all kinds of on-prem tools that integrate with SharePoint libraries. But I could call any of those using this workflow, including Microsoft AI, to extrapolate the results of any document. So in this case, I happen to be applying it to an invoice, but it could easily be a contract or a PO or whatever. I could use that workflow to submit it to OCR and extrapolate key dates from that and store it directly in that library. And let's go ahead and discard that. If we were paying attention to my workflow here, I actually upload it right here. So we are using a third-party OCR tool, cloud-based OCR by the name of Verify, and we just pass it the invoice and it gives us the results. So you can see we pass it the invoice, and then the next step here is to receive the response from that invoice and then go ahead and update the file properties directly in SharePoint with the results. And you could actually test this on our website. So if you go to our website, and you go to products, invoice automation, you'll go to our EasyAP365 page. And if you scroll all the way down, there's a little comment here under the question and answer section saying, how well does OCR work? And there's a link there that'll give you the ability to upload your own invoice. It'll immediately perform OCR on it. And then you could see the results of what it's able to extrapolate. So it's sort of a cool tool. You could go ahead, upload an invoice. If I were to grab one, it'll immediately submit that to the OCR tool and give you my results. And you could see if you were to incorporate this, what type of reliability it would give me. And honestly, the results I find are pretty doggone impressive. So this is the invoice image on the left-hand side. This is what it was able to extrapolate from a nice, clean presentation perspective. But if I want to look at all the data, there's actually all of the data that's being extracted here. So you can see all of the lines associated to it, the SKUs, the dates, etc. All right, so enough of that. Let's go back and go back to our process diagram. It's one more back. Okay, so what we were talking about is the different ways we could receive invoices, right? Which was the different ways that I could capture that and use OCR, so this realm right here. But now that we have them, we could process them, right? So processing them is going to get a little bit more intricate with our product, PO matching, GL account assignment, as well as the involvement of workflow for routing and approval. So let's go through that really quick. And I'm going to go ahead and click this AP processing dashboard here. And what you're going to see here is all these invoices that I've been submitting now are captured in our dashboard. So really from a AP processing, everything, this is where you would start, right? Everything else I was sort of showing you beforehand is the technology supporting it. But if when accounts payable comes into play, this is really where they're starting. These are seeing all the invoices coming into the system. They're all in these auto-created status. They have the invoice associated to it, such that they can look on that. We have the accounts that have been allocated, etc. So everything else was just building up to this, and this is really where our AP users are coming into play, and everything else behind that was just sort of the technology supporting it. So what's happened, right? I have these invoices in these dashboards. I have a status associated to it. I have the results of OCR coming into play. I have validation. So if you see this, this is double checking this invoice number against my ERP, saying that it already exists. If I were to go ahead and make this number unique here by just putting today's date, what you'll see is that it will requery the ERP, and then that warning message will go away because now it's going to be unique. It's not going to be flagged as a duplicate. So I have these invoices in these dashboards. I have various statuses. Our product does support both PO as well as non-PO invoices. If a PO invoice came in as opposed to adding those allocation items, it would have matched the item directly from the PO. So these are all the PO items that are being queried directly from an ERP that would have come in automatically. But we're going to focus on our non-PO example, and we're going to go ahead and submit this. Submitting this is going to kick off, yet again, another workflow, right? But this workflow is now going to be there for review and approval. So it's going to route this to different managers using a hierarchy or a delegation of authority that I've configured in the system. So let's go ahead and submit a couple just for the fun of it to get a couple going here. And let's close out a couple of these tabs, and I'm going to find my email. And now if I'm pretending to be, someone more from a reviewer perspective as opposed to accounts payable, this would be the manager coming into play. And the manager is going to receive an email, which will take a second or so to come in, requesting their review for that invoice. While I'm waiting for my email, I could actually show you the Teams integration as well. So Teams, is very coupled with SharePoint. So everything that I've been showing as far as this invoice dashboard, looking at these invoices, uploading invoices, all can be done from Teams as well. So I could upload new invoices from Teams and have OCR kick off from there. I could do my processing directly from Teams, my check request app, the form I could obviously do from Teams. Here I have a little bit more sophisticated as a Power App. But in addition to the submission, I could also do the approval. So if I go to the approval tab here, this is using Power Automate's integration with Teams, and you're going to see all of the invoices that I have for me to review sitting in my queue. So here's the two I just submitted, and I could click on this directly from Teams or of course from my phone. And if I click on this link here, I'm going to get the details of the invoice. I'm going to be able to look at the invoice itself. I'm going to look at the allocations associated to it, potentially even have the ability to edit it as it's going through the workflow. So you have a lot of options as far as presenting security to the reviewers on can they edit it as part of the workflow. So that was me coming from Teams. If I go back to my email now, those emails have come in, and I have that same task presented to me in Outlook. So my reviewers could have the image associated to it. So this is the invoice itself. On the notification here, you can see we've put some of the key data like the invoice number, the amount, etc. And then they could approve or reject it directly from the PO or from the email. They don't even have to leave Outlook. So whichever one you choose to do is really up to you, because if I were to go back to Teams now, you would see that that invoice is no longer pending my approval. So I believe it was the first one I submitted. Which one was it? Well, this one maybe, right? So if I try to approve this guy, that one's approved, and then that other one you can see just got updated as approved as well. So regardless if I did it from email or from Teams, both of those tasks got cleared out from my queue and both are showing as approved. All right, so that was the manager perspective. Of course, I could have additional reviews after that, but let's go ahead and go look at the invoice and see what sort of changed from accounting side. So if you notice, my invoices are actually disappeared. They're not really gone. They're just being filtered out here. But if I were to clear my filter, what I'm going to see from the accounts payable side is I have a full audit of each step that's occurred in the workflow. So I have all of the reviewers, as well as what their action were, did they approve or reject it, as well as if they entered any notes. So here my reviewer said it looked good, and the date and the timestamp associated to that. We do also establish permissions for who could see which invoice. So we are, using this line item permission model that different people have access to invoices, both from a reviewer as well as a submission or a submitter perspective. And then the last tab you're going to see here is the transaction that got created in real time in my ERP application. So this is actually the transaction that got created in AP. This happened to go into Dynamics GP, but we support many different ERP applications. In fact, we have going back to our site, if you go to integrations, invoice automation, you'll see a full list of all of the products that we integrate with from AP automation side. So that was really it as far as what I wanted to take us through and the scope of this call. I wanted to end it on why you would sort of do this. So if I go back to my slide here, really the goal here is using what we own, right? If I look at the sort of building blocks of what I showed us, we had ERP integration, we had a repository for invoices, we have workflow, we incorporated OCR. All of this bigger piece of this pie here is really being provided by technology that you guys, or anyone who has purchased Office 365 already has in-house. What we're adding is this smaller piece of the pie here, which is providing, the business logic as far as account assignment, and then the ERP integration such that the invoice is created in an automated fashion. And our goal here is, of course, to use all these things that you own so it can be done, in a less expensive manner, but also more flexible, because all of these tools are very robust, right? The workflow is, incredibly robust, the OCR engine, SharePoint, etc. There's just so many capabilities there that we're able to pull in by using this platform. So on the last slide here, before we close it up, we're going to get a little philosophical. We're going to talk about a concept that's called the hierarchy. So I'm sure if you guys have ever studied philosophy in your history, there's the hierarchy of needs. Well, here we have the hierarchy of needs, and it's similar, right? If you're familiar with the hierarchy of needs, but on the lowest level here of costs, if you will, because of course as I transfer up this, things are going to get more expensive, is using what you already have. And then of course I work my way up to borrowing and swapping and thrifting and making, and then ultimately buying a product, right? But the more you're able to accomplish, of course, in these lower levels, the more money you save. And that's really the inspiration for our products, is that we are using this platform that our customers already own, and we're adding ourselves to that mix to harness that technology and that functionality that they've already purchased. So I can see we're right about at time here. I have half past the hour. I'm going to go ahead and put up our contact information. We'll go ahead and follow up this presentation with the slides if anyone's interested, as well as our contact information on email. But here it is if you need it. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. And is there any questions, Richard, or anything we need to address?
There actually is a quick question here. Can you
Sure.
give a quick look into how PO process works? We're interested in using this for creating approving POs?
Sure. So purchase orders is a little bit interesting, right? Because purchase orders are generally going to reside in another system, in an ERP application. So what happens is we're not storing those, but when a invoice with a PO comes in, it actually queries those items and adds those automatically using OCR to recognize that PO and adding those items to the invoice. So the invoice that I submitted in my example was a non-PO invoice. So it came over with allocation line items because there's the need to assign GL accounts. PO items recognize the PO and come over with PO items. So that's why we're picking up PO from OCR, and we're using, if I show you manually, if I click that new PO button, it's actually querying the ERP in real time to get all of the invoices that are, all the POs that are open for that vendor. So you don't have to click it manually. OCR would pick it up and add those line items for me. And then we use the workflow to process exceptions, right? Is the invoice within the amount of the PO? Is it within some tolerance? Does it need some additional level of approval? But the workflow engine gives us that capability because now we can apply rules to it. Anything else? Richard, was that it?
That is it, though. And in rereading that question, it's possible the question also was related to more a purchase requisition process versus a PO matching process.
Ooh, okay. So that's another one. We do have a requisition process. It is using a Power App to request the purchase. Unfortunately, I probably don't have a ton of time to go over that today, but I can
we can reach. I'll reach out to
yeah.
the person who asked the question, and we'll get that covered.
Great.
Okay.
Otherwise, in an effort staying on schedule here, we're going to go ahead and in the webinar, I wanted to thank everyone for their time today and for joining. And again, have a great day and appreciate your interest. So thanks again.